Hi, I want to thank everyone for coming. My name is Yoni Waxman. I'm president of the Tamid group at the University of Miami.
What is the Tamid group?
The Tamid group connects business-minded students with the Israeli economy through an investment fund that's focused on Israeli securities, a consulting group that works directly with Israeli startups, and the fellowship summer internship program in Israel, which is amazing that I took part in. When the Alkali's brought the possibility of this event to us, I thought this would be great for Tamid and Hillel, but not just for that, for the entire school. And we're so excited that Jeff came to come speak to us this evening. And I'd like to call Benji to introduce what we're speaking.
Thank you, Yoni. Hi, my name is Benjamin Alkali, and my brother Eli and I, on behalf of the Alkali Brothers Association, are very proud to have the opportunity to co-sponsor tonight's program alongside the University of Miami Hillel, Tamid Investment Group, and the University of Miami School of Business Administration. I'm so pleased to have the chance to introduce a dear friend and our guest speaker, Jeff Pulver. Jeff is truly a pioneer in the voice-over internet protocol industry. In 1995, Jeff defined VON to stand for Voice Video on the Net, and continues today to contribute to the evolution of internet communications. He is an active investor in early-stage companies with a specific focus on Israeli high-tech startups. He is also an early investor in both Twitter and Foursquare, but is best known for being the co-founder of Vonage. To date, he has invested in more than 250 startups and is one of the few who truly help facilitate the worldwide market acceptance of the VoIP industry. He is a globally renowned leader, author, entrepreneur, internet pioneer, visionary. And last but not least, he is a dreamer. It's my distinct pleasure and truly an honor to introduce you, Jeff Pulver.
Thank you. Yeah, don't even need this. Wow. So the good news is I don't think any of you actually know what I came here to talk about, which is nice. What I thought I would do tonight is to share a few stories about me, but really kind of tie a few pieces together. What is true is that I have invested in lots of startups, but I believe that everybody's a startup. I believe that how many people here are studying business? Just curious. And those of you who are not studying business, trust me, you still have to deal with business, whether you're studying it or not. And anyone who ever, how many people here want to have a startup one day? Just curious. Oh, there you go. So what's interesting about Israeli startups, about startups in Israel that I found really fascinating is, if you go to New York or go to LA and you go into a cafe or even go see who's driving a taxi, chances are you'll find a would-be, soon-to-be discovered actor or actress is waitressing or driving a taxi trying to cover costs. In Israel, those people are people who have startups. And in the cafes and the taxis and really all around, it's just an incredible amount of people have a desire to do a startup. But what I discovered, and I believe this, is that every individual person is a startup. And that when you're born, you figure out what you want to do. Eventually, you figure out who you are. In the world of startups, there's a word called pivot, where basically you change direction and try to figure out where to go into. And really, when you go through college, you go through lots of pivots yourself, trying to find your major, trying to figure out what you want to do. And it's unfortunate that you actually have to determine a major while you're here, because when you go through life, you'll discover that people who are fortunate enough to go to college probably don't end up practicing in that business or practicing in the sector that they actually studied, because life is such that you always have to make choices and always change. And whether you're 17, 27, or 57, there are people who are always trying to rediscover what they do. For me, I grew up in a time from a while ago, and when I was a kid, I didn't have the internet. And what I discovered was radio. And the story I want to share with you is how voice over IP, which I'll explain a little bit, how it actually saved my life. Now voice over IP is a technology. Anyone here ever use Skype? Some of you do, right? So that's the underlying technology that enables that to happen. I did not invent any of that, but I did create a world that helped facilitate people to spend time to invest to create products like Skype. And I did go to Washington, and I accidentally created a law which provides an opportunity for entrepreneurs to offer voice services without having to worry about being a phone company. So that was a good thing. But when I was growing up, I'm from Long Island. Anyone here from Long Island? Anyone? Some of you? So, you know, I grew up on Long Island, and actually when I was like 9 years old, I was in Queens, and we moved to Great Neck. And the thing was, for me, when I was growing up, I didn't have very many friends, and I was pretty lonely. And I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with being lonely, or you know, if you remember what it's like to be 8 or 9 years old and not have many friends. But you know, these days you can go on the internet and you could find people. But imagine if you had to take a test before you can go on the internet. The internet would be a lot different. For me, I had just got by. You know, I was so lonely that I tried to make friends by adopting the music of people who I liked, trying to find stuff in common with these people. And it took me forever, it turns out, to actually find music that I liked, because I was so into trying to find other people to find a connection. And one day when I'm home, my father tells me to call his brother, Fred, my Uncle Fred, up. That I should call him up for him to take me to his office. And I don't know about you, but as a kid, but at 9 years old, I didn't listen to too many people, including my dad, and I never called my uncle. But one day I come home from school, and there's my uncle waiting to take me to his office. And it's like, okay, so I go to his office. He had an office in Farmingdale. My uncle was a manufacturer of cable TV test equipment, as if I cared. And he showed me this tour, and it's like, yeah, and all these people are very nice to him. And I go into his office, in his office, and what really got me was that he had this box on his desk, and I couldn't figure out why, like, his entire office on his desk was this big box. And he turned it on, and it was in some knobs, and it turned out it was a radio. And very soon, when my uncle started tuning some knobs, I started hearing very squeaky voices. I couldn't quite make out what was being said. I thought it was English, but wasn't really sure. But when you tune the dial, you could almost make out what the voices that were being heard. And then my uncle found a spot where nobody was talking, and he said some very cryptic things, which I now understand. But I'll just tell you what he said, because it's pretty cryptic. He said, "CQ, CQ, this is K2QQM calling CQ." And then he paused and repeated, "CQ, CQ, this is K2QQM calling CQ." Then when he let go of the microphone, there was a roar of voices waiting to talk to my uncle. And for about an hour, I was sitting there opposite my uncle on the other side of the desk, mesmerized, listening to my uncle repeat to everybody, "Hi, my name is Fred. I'm in Farmingdale, New York." And he gave a signal report, how loud the person was coming in, to whoever he spoke to. Now, somehow, amazingly, no matter where in the world these people were from, they all spoke English. I don't know how that was possible. But they all spoke English. They all were waiting to talk to my uncle, which I didn't understand either. And it was about for an hour. And what I realized was that my uncle actually had the cure for loneliness. And if all I could do was take this radio and bring it back to my bedroom where I was growing up, I would have friends. The trouble was, in order to actually have this radio to work, I actually had to take a test that the Federal Communications Commission gave. And it turned out that I had to teach myself college-level physics, Morse code, and the rules and regulations to be a ham. So as a 9-year-old kid, I was slightly frustrated. But I studied, and I taught myself college-level physics, and when I was 12 and a half, I finally passed the test. And when I finally had a license to communicate, I never shut up, I promise you. And I more or less grew up on the radio. For me, I made connections by talking to people all over the world, where I could tune the radio dial and hear a voice. Most of the time, I never really got to know the people in person who I met, but I could feel them. I heard their voices. And you know, if any of you today are on Twitter, anyone here on Twitter? Some of you? So to me, Twitter is the radio of the internet. Very, very similar way that you may be tweeting with people you know, but you might find people you don't know, but you're connecting with, and you know the personalities of the people. You don't necessarily know who they are, what they look like. But when you go online, you can start a conversation. So for me, that's what the ham radio was. And some of you might remember ICQ as an instant messaging app. So ICQ was invented by some very lonely former ham radio operators. Because CQ is Morse code for seeking you. The letter C, the letter Q. And it means seeking you. Now, being that I was saying CQ, my uncle would say CQ, that's just not being very creative. But it is more or less saying I am seeking a contact. So when ICQ was invented in Israel, it actually was named to help people find instant messaging. It's really loneliness and laziness, I think, are the two drivers of creativity and invention. So for me anyway, it was this ham radio which was my savior. And when I wasn't on the ham radio, I became very passionate about music, and I actually started to DJ when I was a teenager, and then I started a pirate radio station. Long Island was a home for pirate radio stations, and of course I was broadcasting on shortwave, which means no one could hear me, no one locally could hear me, but I was broadcasting to the world, and I was, because when you're with the ham radio equipment, I could actually broadcast illegally on shortwave, and it was cool. I thought it was cool. So I was WARG, that stood for We Are Really Good. I was Ray Haber, and I used to broadcast on stormy winter nights and on federal holidays, figuring the FCC didn't employ people to try to shut me down on stormy winter nights and federal holidays. I don't know, but that's what I did for about 10 years. My sisters, though, they were the request line, and back when I was doing this, they had there were these things called loop lines, where if I called 212-976-9977, I heard a very loud buzz. That's all you heard. But if you called 212-976-9979, the two lines got connected. And it was a phone. There was a book called "Steal This Book" that Abby Hoffman wrote, which I had a copy of. And he wrote about all these really wonderful things in the phone system, and it was built in really to help people test the phone system. But I used it as a way as a request line, because it turned out when you trace the phone lines, it traced to a pay phone in the South Bronx. So I figured I was safe. And well, besides me running a pirate radio station, the other people who used these request lines were prostitutes and drug dealers. So my sisters were kind of harassed all the time, because most of the time people were not calling us up trying to request music for WARG. They were saying, get the hell off my line, because they're trying to make a connection. But maybe one day they'll forgive me for that. But anyway, that was my childhood. I grew up basically trying to connect with people using every means possible. And the other thing was, if you ever saw reruns of MASH, and Radar O'Reilly was the guy who used the radio, I was the person who used to connect the radio and the telephone. And I found it very fascinating, particularly friends of mine in Israel who didn't want to, because there was a time when long-distance phone calls actually cost money. It was the threat of voice over IP that actually reduced long distance to almost nothing. But I used to do phone patches where I take people from friends of mine in Tel Aviv who want to call someone in New York City. I would patch it over the radio, over the telephone, and I used to do that. And I mentioned all this because life was okay. I spent about 10 years, or I guess about 10 years on the radio, and the thing was I used to spend about this. And you know, as a kid, I didn't have much of a social life, but when girls on Long Island heard I could DJ, they used to pay me to play the parties they'd invite me to. And if they would have just invited me, so it was kind of nice because I made money that way. If they would have invited me, I would have done it for free. But you know, if they don't invite me, they pay me. It's okay. So I did that, and you can see where this is going. So anyway. I ended up, I don't know how, when I was 16, I started a couple of companies before college. I had a DJ company, which surprisingly, a friend of mine still runs today. After all these years, it's still in business, and he's doing pretty well with it. And I started a software publishing company. I started writing software, writing code, and I had that was a fun summer, because I used to make more or less each week what my friends made for the summer. So it was it was a nice business, and I didn't want to go to college. And I think what surprises me, I somehow ended up at Hofstra University, and I don't remember applying. I would suggest my father applied for me, but he died, so I can't really ask him. But it occurred to me like 3 or 4 years ago, I actually don't ever remember applying. And it's kind of weird, right? But I did graduate. I did go to class, and I ended up with an accounting degree. The good news is I don't practice accounting. And
But what I was discovering about all these things is that, if you have an idea for something, it's up to you sometimes to make it happen. And one of the things that I learned really young that I believe in completely is that the best gift you can give anybody is to believe in them. That's like the absolute best gift you can ever do. And sometimes the next person you meet can change your life. I've seen that happen often. Or sometimes you'll be somebody that will change someone else's life, maybe not today, but an interaction, something you said today, 5 years from now will touch someone, and it's just amazing how we're all connected. And for me,
I had a lot of ideas, a lot of creative ideas for companies, but my friends were morons. They never really, I wouldn't say they're morons, they just really didn't get me. And so I got really angry because I went through I had 4 or 5 really good ideas for startups, but my friends would tell me they were bad ideas. And I listened to them, so I was a moron. It wasn't until I actually had the strength to listen to myself, to allow me to do something, did I actually do interesting things. And so for me, it was after I graduated from college, I worked in accounting. And any of you studying accounting, by the way, some of you? So you may know that what tax season is, it's basically slave labor, right? They basically will overpay you, but really underpay you to basically work 70, 80 hours a week from January to April. And so I signed up for slave labor too. And, but it turns out there are 168 hours in the work week, take off 25 hours for Shabbat. You still have plenty of time you have billable hours for. And so I started a software company during that time. And to my utter amazement, I got written up in a trade publication, and my bosses found out about it, so I resigned from the company. But when they heard that I was actually going to focus on what I was going to do, I ended up with 23 partners. So for 7 years, I had a company called Spreadsheet Solutions. And I was back in the day, if you actually understood how to use a spreadsheet, it was actually a specialty. And I was bar mitzvahed on time value money theory, so I understood finance, and I wrote some software which was a pretty interesting application. And I ended up becoming a person on Wall Street, because after I did the spreadsheet stuff, I taught myself bond mathematics. I never took calculus in college. But when you try writing code and you had to do a Maclaurin Power Series expansion, if you don't know, so I had to teach myself that stuff. So some of the stuff you need. But I ended up becoming an expert in fixed income mathematics. And I ended up also building trading systems where I took market data information from different markets. And I don't know, somehow they were all listening to me. And so I ended up building trading systems for Wall Street. And as luck would have it, I was working in the World Trade Center. I ended up, because I was constantly pivoting and changing direction, because, and I stopped asking people for permission to do something, I just did it. So I think at this point on me, I'm on version 8.3, but back then it was Jeff 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. But in 1995, I had an interesting job. I sold my software company to a company on Wall Street. And I had a 3-year position where I worked on. I was sort of all about office politics. And the first 18 months was a lot of fun. The other 18 months, I could shoot myself. But I also learned something about personal inertia. You see, because if you ever find yourself in a situation that's too good and you can't get yourself out of, it's like you have to be fired in order to get out. Like, it was crazy because I had at the time I was married. I had 2 young children, and I was overpaid. And we had this game on Fridays that went for a year and a half where we had about 17 managers we started out with saying who's getting fired next. And it ended up going down until we had 3. And if you know you're being fired, but you're overpaid, it's very hard to get off and leave and find another job. You have to actually be pushed out in order to take action, which I just mentioned for a reason. But in February 1995, I was in my second half of the last 18 months of my job, I went from having 27 people working for me to 1 person to nobody. And I was really having a hard time. Again, I was feeling kind of lonely, but I couldn't complain to anybody at that point. And but there was a small company in Israel who made some software, who put out who had a product called the first iPhone came from Israel, but it wasn't from Apple. It was from a company called Vocaltech. And what iPhone offered, get this, is a way for 2 people on the internet to talk to each other, strangers. Now, I grew up in a world where I spoke to strangers all the time. A lot of people could not figure out why in the world you want to talk to strangers. But what I found fascinating was when I loaded the software up, about 20% of the people who were using the software were using their ham radio call signs as their ID. So there was an entire group of people pretending to be on the radio, talking on the computer as if we're on the radio. And this was the birth of the voice over IP industry. And see, voice over IP is a core technology that was designed by the Israeli Defense Force in 1980. And it was used by the Israeli Air Force as a secret platform for Air Force pilots to talk to each other in the 80s. And then it was commercialized in the early 90s. And Vocaltech was the first company to successfully put out a product which actually worked. There was a lot of hype about this, but it actually worked. What got me going was that I realized that I never ever would have to pay for a phone call ever again. Because in the world of services and applications, voice became an application. That was the big thing. So I no longer would have to pay money to AT&T or anybody else to make a phone call, simply just use this application. Stuff which you now take for granted wasn't like that 15 years ago. I mean, the world was different. Anyway, I discovered that, and the thing was, I actually worked on Wall Street. I have no background in no background in telecom at all, no background in anything like that. But I believe I'm a modern day Forrest Gump. The reason I say this is the day that this internet phone stuff came out, I said, oh my God, this is amazing. So I created a mailing list, which is just a way for people to communicate before all this other fancy stuff happened. And so over the course of 6 months, maybe 3,000 people subscribed to my mailing list. What I didn't realize, it was the R&D people, deep research people from the largest phone companies of the world, together with all these other people doing very, very fascinating things in telecom. What was even more amazing was they were listening to me. Because I was just a user of the platform who was just making notes, making commentary, making very silly stuff at times, but they were listening to me. And in September 1995, someone asked, is it possible to interconnect a telephone and a computer? And I immediately said yes. The reason I said yes is what I didn't tell you was, before I was a freshman at Hofstra, I spent an entire summer, I had a Trans Am at the time, and I found a way to rig up my radio in my car, so within 30 miles of my house, I could actually make phone calls. But this was 1980. I actually had a mobile phone in my car in 1980, and I thought it'd be a really cool way to meet girls, you know? So I actually got a few girls when I was a freshman to come to my car to check out my radio, but no one was impressed. And it was a very humiliating part of my growing up. But I thought it was so cool because I could actually make phone calls, you know? Anyway, that device, the phone patch that I used 15 years prior, I did connect to my computer and it worked. And lo and behold, once I knew I can connect the telephone and the computer, a month later, I announced something called Free World Dial-Up. I just created this out of the blue because you can be creative, right? So I announced the world's first free phone network. It was crazy. The amount of press I got at that moment in time in my life, I've never had again. And they took me seriously, which was really crazy. But I still remember, I still remember fighting with my father over this. In November '95, Thanksgiving weekend, the Sunday Times of London had this big story about Bill Gates and the road ahead. On the back page of the Sunday Times of London was a story about free world dial-up and the threat to British telecom, the future of British telecom. It was a really funny article, I thought. But they were taking us so seriously. But we were not scalable. There was no quality. It was all, but they believed it. Anyway, make things even crazier. In March of 1996, 300 phone companies in America went to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Know what they did? They asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software like this internet phone to be banned in America, and the makers of the software to be regulated as phone companies. Now, I thought that was really funny. But over the course of 3 days, I got hundreds of emails from people all over the world asking me what was I going to do about this. What would you do about this? I had no idea. I was not I didn't have any standing in Washington. Did I mention I worked on Wall Street? Did I mention I didn't know anything about telecom? But I had a mailing list. So what did I do? I coined the term VON back in '95 to stand for a voice on the net. So I created the Voice on the Net Coalition. I don't know, you could do anything, right? So I did. Do you believe it? 110 companies signed up, And 10 days later, I announced that we were fighting this petition. We were successful for 9 years keeping voice on the net, voice over IP unregulated in America. It was crazy. And so this started to happen, and do you guys know what the OECD is? The Organization of Economic Developing Countries, OECD. They had a summit in Dublin in June of '96. Guess who they invite? Me. Why? Because they were doing a summit about the effects of internet telephony and the long-term effects on international telecom policy. Do you think I know anything about international telecom policy? No. But I go to the summit because I figured, I like the beer in Dublin. I figured it would be kind of cool. No, I seriously went there for the beer. And I figured, okay, Trinity College is nice. So I go there for the Guinness. You know, it's very nice now. And it was my time to talk. And all I could think about was the fact that in the morning it was sunny, the afternoon was cloudy, and by the time I got to talk, I was hungry. And that's more or less what I said. But believe it or not, they interpreted what I said as, it's sunny, great opportunities for the future of internet telephony. It's cloudy, the threat of international regulation is creating uncertainty in the marketplace. And I'm hungry, that means great profits will be sown. And this is what they published. It was absolutely nuts. So if you ever seen the movie Being There, I did that too. And then I come back from work. We had the 4th of July weekend, and this is July '96. And what happened was, I worked for a 1,000-person company. There were 125 people who worked in our system, in IT and the systems department. And they like doing reorgs. And when you get a job, you'll realize that people always like to reorg all the time. It's just one of those things. So I show up, and I made the mistake. Maybe it wasn't a mistake, but 5 minutes before the meeting started, I looked at the org chart, and I screamed, "Hey guys, there must be a mistake here. I'm not on it." I said, "Oh." And then the 2 co-managers of the department said, "Didn't you fire him? Didn't you fire him?" And anyway, 3 hours later, I get the phone call in my office. "Hey, do you want to leave now, or do you want to be escorted out?" So the company I worked for, that was July of '96. So I didn't know what I was going to do because I'd never been. Anyone here been fired? I will tell you that being fired can save your life, and that when you're on the edge of having a decent job and no savings and don't know what you're going to do is when you get to be the most creative ever. And for me, it's kind of showed me where my friends were or weren't. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wasn't going to go work back in systems. And I had this internet telephony revolution that was brewing, but didn't really know what I was doing about that since I really did not know much about telecom. But I figured, what the hell? So I decided to do a conference, bring together people. I used to attend lots of conferences. I decided to do a conference about this technology. Why not, right? So I announced I'm doing a conference. The conference took place on September 10th and 11th, 1996. The first event was called the Talking Net. And blew my mind, but 224 people from around the world showed up at this conference. What was even crazier was some of those people within 2 or 3 years would be billionaires on paper, because some of these people who came to that first conference started companies which went public, which had great value. And I didn't even speak at that first conference. And then I changed the name of the conference to VON. Now the thing was, back then, Hebrew was the actual official language of my conference, because all this core technology for voice over IP was coming out of Israel. And I don't know how many other people were faking like I was, but I had no idea what was going on. But I was having fun. And because I didn't know anything about running conferences, I charged as much as I wanted to. So all of a sudden, I went from having no revenue, I was charging $2,000 a ticket. Within 18 months, I was doing like $15 million a year in business. Because I could. No one told me no. So I did. And I charged whatever I wanted to for sponsorships, and people paid. These are all life lessons, by the way. It turns out, because when you take away your boundaries, anything becomes possible. And the best thing my parents ever did for me growing up was in June of '96, nothing. They did not give me any money whatsoever to help me find myself. But luckily, I had an American Express card, which I still hold on to today. Because it was my Optima card, when I had a job, American Express was kind enough to give me $15,000 of credit. And I used all of it to put down as a deposit for the first conferences I did. I needed to pay for the catering and for for the room rental. Anyway, I did the first conference. It was successful. It's like playing roulette. I let it ride. I did it again, or blackjack, whatever you do. And then actually in '97, actually you guys must know who Mark Cuban is. So I knew Mark Cuban before you did. But when I knew him, nobody knew him, but he had a dream that people would want to listen to sports events from a distance. So he grew up in Dallas, and if he's in San Francisco, he was using the internet to transmit radio stations over the internet. How strange that was, right? So that was called AudioNet. You know, a few years later, for $4.6 billion, he sells his business to Yahoo. But I knew him when. And he spoke at my conference, and it was really funny is I saw Mark recently, and he said, you know, I want him to speak at one of my events. He says, you don't have to, just get my old presentation. The stuff hasn't happened yet. But I met Mark, I met all these other people, you know, over time. But in April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, '97, I did a conference. 500 people came, then 800 people came, and this started growing, where I had this like pretty crazy business that was going on, and I was getting involved with telecom policy, and then because I worked on Wall Street, I thought that there'd be a spot market for everything, like, you know, minutes, for orange juice futures and these futures and those futures. So I figured I'd create a spot market for minutes. I don't know, between war or between disasters. If you want to call somebody, you want to be able to get through. So I created something called the Minutes Exchange, which was an exchange for people who had capacity to sell to each other. Anyway, life goes on, and in December 2000, I get a really strange phone call. I was actually in Key Biscayne when this happened. It was from a competitor who wanted to know what's my exit strategy. I asked him, what is an exit strategy? He said, you know, when you sell your company to somebody else and you go on and do something else. I said, why would I do that? For the first time in my life, I'm actually making good money and having fun. But it was a premonition to me, so I figured, okay. And so I had in the back of my mind that I had to sell my business. I don't know why I had to sell it, but I had to sell my business. So I ended up, it took till July of 2001, but I found a buyer. Do you know when the deal closed?
9/11.
The day before 9/11, September 10th, 2001. And it was a deal that was pretty okay deal, because on paper it was like $57 million. For a company that I started for $15,000, wasn't so bad. But then 9/11 happened, so it crushed away all the upside, so it really wasn't 57, it was only 40, but it wasn't so bad. But then 9/11 happened. Now, the company I used to work for lost 700 people. I worked for Cantor Fitzgerald Securities. And it was kind of devastating, because, you know, that's when I realized being fired can save your life. And that, you know, I started to really appreciate and value what all that meant. Luckily, I was very happy that I stole some people from Cantor when I was building my companies. But one guy did not leave after I hired him, and I carry that with me. And then September 12th is my birthday, so it's like 3 fucked up days. But because, you know, I was excited, oh my God, and no, wow. And so, but that's how that was my September 10th, 11th, and 12th. But, you know, when I look at all what happened, you know, a lot of crazy things happened in that time. And I actually, the company that was the Minutes Exchange, I ended up hiring a person who had taken out all the profits from retail brokerage, and he wanted to do something else. His name was Jeff Citron, and he ended up investing like $12 million. And while he was working on that startup, I told him the next company I wanted to start was a broadband telephone company. And OPS, Citron got bored with running the Minutes Exchange, so he did a restart. And so I ended up starting Vonage because the Minutes Exchange became Vonage. And Vonage is the age of voice on the net. That's how he stole Von from me. He never gave it back. He stole the name. But, you know, when I look at a lot of this, you know, there's a lot of heart and soul in what you do. And, you know, I do believe that, you know, when you go out and you try to make something happen, you know, if you believe in something, you can make it happen. You know, and sometimes all you have is you. And that if you don't give yourself a chance to make it happen, it will not happen. And I've been living that ever since. And for me, I ended up selling the company I sold my business to in 2001. 17 months later, went bankrupt, so I bought it back. And then in 2007, we sold it again. But I don't have a happy ending after that, because I did a management buyout, and the company that financed it had no confidence in the management, and they bankrupted us. So that was kind of hard. But you learn a lot about yourself when you do these things. And for me, I got involved with investing in startups back in '97 because I thought that if you can believe in somebody, you can invest in somebody. And I invest teeny bits of money. I used to invest lots of money in startups. Unfortunately, anytime I invested a lot of money in a startup, guess what happened? Gone. But when I invest small amounts of money in startups, I've had this crazy success where people have been able to, I can't explain why, but it's worked out. And so, I've in the last year and a half, I've invested in like 35 Israeli startups, maybe 40, 45 startups in total. And every time, for me, I always look for someone who's crazy. If you give me someone who's had 4 failures in a row and one person who's only seen success, I'll actually invest in the person who's the 4 failures in a row. I look, when I look for startups to invest in, I always look for the people first. It's not about the ideas. I mean, they need to have ideas. But it's about the people, it's about the team, it's about the energy that they have. I mean, I'm very sensitive to people who try to bullshit me, and very sensitive to people who don't realize how amazing they are. And I do believe that the best, having been on the street myself and needing people to believe in me and not finding those people, if I find out someone who's raising $1 million for their startup and someone who doesn't have anyone, if I like what they're doing, I'll be the first. I'd rather be that first person to believe in that person, because the person who's already raised $1 million doesn't need my money; it's just money. But if you could find someone to believe in, I believe that's an ultimate gift you can give anybody. I mean, it's a very beautiful thing. And so I've spent a lot of my time trying to find people to believe in. And the reason I ended up getting involved in Israeli startups was all out of guilt. I don't know if anyone here is Jewish, but there's this guilt. And I made all this money on technology that wasn't mine. I simply helped create, by a series of accidents, I helped launch what became a $1 trillion marketplace. I don't take any credit for inventing anything. I did nothing to do with it. But I did bring the people together, which touched everyone else's lives. And so what do I do to try to get rid of the guilt? I go to Israel. And I go to Israel in 2005 to say thank you, just to say thank you. All I wanted to do, it was very, very simple. I go to Israel to find 23 people who gave up, who dedicated their lives to inventing voice over IP. And it actually turned out to be very nice. I found 23 people. And in Jerusalem, and one evening in June, the mayor of Jerusalem, we had this beautiful event with people's families, and we honored everybody. And it was very beautiful. It was a lot of hugs, it was really good emotion. And the next day was in Ramat Aviv, and we did a symposium about the future of voice over IP. Sounds simple, right? The morning went off well. Then I held my first ever press conference in Israel. Anyone here hold a press conference in Israel? And we were fortunate to have the foreign correspondents from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and all the various Israeli media there. And this person over here asked me a question. He says, "Jeff, why are you here?" And I said, to say thank you. You jump in and say, no, don't lie to us. Tell us why you're here. I just say thank you. You say, stop lying. No, they're actually yelling at me, telling me that I'm standing here lying to them, that I'm not here to say thank you. Anyway, this went on for about 10 minutes until I lost my temper, and I stormed out. And I had to have a friend of mine start the second session of the conference. And then I plotted for a year how to get even with the Israeli media. So what did I do? I come back in June of 2006, and I decided to host a party for the high-tech industry to say thank you to everybody. And 1,000 people came. And it was the start of how I ended up getting involved with Israeli startups. Because what happens if you throw a party for 1,000 people, I might add it was 7 hours, it was open bar for 7 hours, it was live music, and it was nothing but pure fun, people started approaching me with their startup ideas. It was the craziest thing. It turns out the best way to make money in the world of startups and to get deal flow is to be nice and be friendly and just offer free drinks. And people will drink them. And so ever since, whenever I could afford it, I've been going to Israel in the summer and hosting a summer party. And any of you who are on Tamid this summer, you're all invited to come to my party. It'll be on July 3rd. You should look me up so you could actually remember this. But it's a high-energy, fun party. Some people I know Gabby, you were there last year. Was it fun? Amazing. Right? Am I kidding you about any of this?
Yeah, lots of free drinks.
But it's not just about the drinks. The people, it's just, so for me, as a business, I mean, it's not, And those of you who want to be entrepreneurs, one of the reasons I believe the benefits of being an entrepreneur is you get to set your own culture. You actually can create your own world that you're not lonely, where you are doing the things the way you want to do it. And that's a beautiful thing. Maybe it's a slightly crazy thing. But no one's going to challenge you. And no one has to, it gives you absolute peace and a chance to actually set your own groundwork. And it's, but at the end of the day, I think everybody's a startup. I think that no matter what degree you are, no matter where you go, you have a chance to define your life at any moment in time. And if things aren't working out, stop and reboot yourself. And just let yourself, reboot. And don't worry about what your friends say, because fuck them. I mean, it's your life. It's your life, and you have to own it. And because you can't outsource that. You could outsource many things, but your life is something which you have to take ownership of. And so, I'm an advocate for people to just understand who they are, give them a chance to explore. And with the startups that I have, sometimes when I invest in a startup, I don't know whether or not they're going to be successful. It doesn't matter to me. I know that eventually they will be, and if I had the chance to be with them while they're being successful, fine. But I think there's something very special about just connecting and allowing yourself to be who you want to be. So anyway, that was my story about voice over IP. The only other thing I might add is that I ended up with this law in Washington, and it was a crazy rush because I had another premonition in 2003 that when the phone companies woke up and discovered broadband, that they would take away all the creative incentives for entrepreneurs to be creative on broadband. And I went to Washington, I filed a petition, because that they filed a petition against us. I filed a petition, and to my utter surprise, a year later, the FCC granted it. And to this day, I have a law in my name called the Pulver order that provides a opportunity for any entrepreneur to be creative in America. And I kind of like that. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions to ask Jeff by any chance?
Microphone?
I don't need a microphone, I'm good. Anyone in particular, anything about his life? In the back, yes?
Yes, Jeff, if you had to, now looking at your life, and I just enjoy it so much that you're so open, and as a matter of fact, I remember the first time I met you was somehow we got in a diner somewhere, I think it was in Las Vegas. One of the things you were telling us were about you had some functions, and Microsoft stole your functions.
They did.
And then we offered to be your expert witnesses.
That's right, that's my name, Spreadsheet Solutions.
So that was the first time, and then we saw you along the way. But one of the things is, now that you look back, what would you do any different? Because in a way, you were able to say, I'm going to go my own way. But now looking back, what would you be doing differently?
I think I had to live the hard lessons I learned in order to stand here today and be alive. And, I have a very hard, I don't know. If I had a chance to do something really differently, I always envisioned being back in the 1980s or 1970s and trying to convince my father to quit smoking. But my sister tried, and my father died in '98 anyway. And I would have maybe tried harder to maybe get my father to stop smoking, because I kind of miss my dad. And that's the thing which, the other thing which I learned is that, I don't know if you guys are in your 20s or teenage, the thing that something that people haven't told you yet, you never get old. Your skin may age, but the person who you are is who you are. And you're going to be like this the rest of your life. The challenges, the issues, the fun. But, what you are who you are. But the joke is, you really are. And that took a whole life to learn that, And it's like, just be comfortable with who you are. Because you can do amazing things. Not every day is going to be great, but things do get better. In some cases, greatness will happen. So, I don't really think I'd do much differently. Maybe I don't know, even though I'm getting divorced, I don't mind my kids. I think it's great. I suffered for many years with my wife, but again, it's the price you pay. I really have no bitterness. But I've learned, if you look up the word synchronicity and look up the word serendipity, I've discovered soul. I've discovered ruach in life. I've discovered that I can meet total strangers and know their story as if I knew them their entire life. And I'm not talking about making things up about them, it's just feeling stuff. It's just when you can open yourself up and be open, amazing things can and will happen. So I don't know. I mean, I apologize to anyone I ever offended, but you know, I was just trying to discover who I was. Any other questions? Yes?
Someone told me once that in the entrepreneurial circuit, they speak very, very highly of failure and going through that experience, but in reality, it's very cold and it's not accepted.
It depends upon what culture you're from. You know, I don't know anyone who gets their toes cut off. Failure is wonderful. I mean, I think the thing is, I mean, you see me standing here wearing purple glasses. You know, I discovered one of the things of being an entrepreneur is you have to define your own style and stick to it. Don't be defensive about anything. You know, fail fast. You know, I have failed miserably sometimes, but my failures came because I saw the future, but the future was either hasn't caught up yet or I mistimed it. But the thing with success is that you don't know why you're successful. Well, you do not know why you're successful. I mean, because if you're doing something great, you may assume why you're just doing something great, but you really don't know. But when you fail, you absolutely know the things you failed about. So, you know, failure in that way is very rewarding. I actually have on Facebook a group of about 100 co-founders of startups that I've invested in, including a bunch of failures. And when the people who can come forward and talk about their failure take so much courage, and we learn so much more from their failures than anyone ever will talk about their success. I mean, it's sort of like telling you that I played in the World Series of Poker and only telling you about my winnings. It's the losings that are actually more fun. It's those busted hands. It's actually being in the game and actually understanding and playing and trying to understand the psychology of what happened. So, but there are certain cultures where failure is not an option, and it usually comes from, if you grew up in a world, friends of mine who want to be entrepreneurs, whose families worked, who were civil servants, where they had jobs which were predictable, it's very, 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 very hard to get support to be an entrepreneur. That's where failure is really not looked on very well, because there's like you try once, you don't succeed, you may not have another chance because you have to. It takes too much effort to do that. But I really believe that, you know, if you feel something, you owe it to yourself to pursue it. And again, forget about the business side of it. It's whatever you want to do. It's when you discover what you like, or. You know, I spent so much time not knowing what I liked. I spent so much time, it took me forever to discover who I was, because I was trying so hard to be somebody else. So, you know, failure for me, I failed a lot, but I think I did okay. And I think that, you know, failure is a beautiful thing because we learn and we share. Any other questions?
Anyone else?
Yes?
You mentioned that laziness and loneliness are inventions and creativity. Can you explain that?
Anyone here lonely or anyone here lazy? Anyone here write software? I mean, it just comes. You know, I used to believe I was a very prolific word developer, and I found that I got inspired. Way or to I think everyone around here, everyone in this room wants to communicate with somebody at one point. Nobody wants to be by themselves. Nobody wants to be an island. And it drove me to discover, you know, two-way or multi-party communications. I just think that you'll find there's a little bit of loneliness, and some of the great inventors of the world have used that as an asset to help inspire them to figure out better ways to connect. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but you know, people who I studied, you know, it's all there, and it's also, I try to make fun of it, but it's part of us as people. You know, it's sort of like if any of you in the last year, have any of you in the last year saw a friend's Facebook status update or a Twitter tweet and called them, or actually went to see them, or felt it, or cried or felt emotion from it? Right. There's something magical that's happening in the world today, which is much bigger than just the feeling of loneliness, but it's the fact that emotions are now being shared in real time. and that a world that has 7.3 billion people on it, we're actually now more connected ever in the history of humanity, and that there's something that's going on that's much deeper, which is another unintended consequence of the internet, because we're getting connected. I don't know where that brings us, but the fact that we could feel emotion and share it is pretty cool. And I have to believe that the world's a better place because of that. Any other? Yes?
Jeff, in reading your bio before we arrived here, it said that you've become very spiritual lately. Is this a result of your life work? Was there something that prompted that, or was like an aha moment for you, and how did that manifest itself in your life?
Well, I had a lot of coincidences that I realized are not so coincidental, or if they were coincidental, it was very coincidental. And so I started looking and probing, and I've had I'll be the first to admit that being lucky is okay, and I'll be the first to admit that there are a lot of synchronous things that just happened to me. So rather than deny it, I decided to accept it. And when I accepted, all of a sudden I was able to do all sorts of other things, which I could tell you all, I could say this in front of everybody, but some of it's pretty personal and pretty deep and pretty emotional, but it's very real stuff. I mean, I became friends with Deepak Chopra, and if Deepak was in a good mood, I mean, the way we greet each other, Deepak says, "I love you, Jeff." So I say, "I love you, Deepak." And I ended up doing a conference last summer about discovering and finding meaning in life. And I assembled a group of people who actually shared their stories about finding and discovering meaning. What I couldn't deny was that a lot of the events that I did, people sat next to each other who had with each other, like absolutely nothing in common, but in many cases they became lifelong friends. And there was a deepness that started to happen. And so for me, I just started to I don't know, one day I realized I can do Reiki, and one day I realized I can sit near people and actually know their stuff. And I tried to use technology as an answer, but it's very personal. And I mean, but to some extent, that's why I've also taken a new approach on health. You know, to me, I have twin sons, Dylan and Jake. They go to Colgate. They'll be 19 in a few weeks. And what I cannot believe is that your generation's life expectancy in America is less than my generation's. I find that horrible, but it's a fact. And 9 months ago, I started on a quest. I might add that in the last 9 months, I've lost about 70 pounds. And no, I have. And I'm trying to lose another 40. And you know, I've discovered that, you know, certain foods and stuff which, you know, I've given up have had a profound effect on me. And you know, I haven't figured out yet how to fix the problem. But like when my father died of cancer, if you smoke, at least it says on the warning label on the cigarette carton, you can get cancer. But for my entire life, I was eating with ignorance. And you know, what I was trying to advocate for is for people to eat with intelligence. That if you eat certain foods and you know it, fine. But if you consume foods ignorantly, I want to try to prevent that or try to fix that. And the thing is, I run a conference on education and technology, and I haven't found very many schools anywhere in the world that teach the science of exercise or teach the science of food. And I mean, for me personally, I bought 41 books on health, wellness, fitness, and food, 41 books. And I can summarize what I learned in 5 very short sentences. One, for me, no wheat. It's not no weed, no wheat. And I say that because 3 weeks ago I was in Houston. I was at a dad's conference. And after I said this, what I was just saying now, 3 dads came up to me and said, "Jeff, we got all that other stuff, but why the weed? Why do you give the weed?" I said, "Wheat." But there was my accent. Here you guys get that. No sugar. I avoid sugar stuff. I eat green things. Your parents said eat green. You really should. And exercise. I can't deny it. I am absolutely addicted to a drug called endorphins. I used to think that you know, my friends would tell me if I go to the gym, I'd feel better. I thought they were telling me I'd feel better about myself. I didn't realize that actually, yes, I'd feel better. I'm addicted, and it's legal, and it feels awesome. And it's like, oh my God, wow! And I cannot deal with not having it. I traveled to Israel and I traveled to Europe this month, and I still made it to the gym 19 out of 28 days. So, but I'm telling you, it's what you can do for you that matters the most. And so, but I found the spirituality in everything that I do, and I find the connectedness. Because I think that we're all people, right? And you know, it was the Haitian earthquake. I don't know what you guys, if you were in school when the Haitian earthquake happened, but I had a how many people here are on Twitter? Some of you, a few of you. So I'm at Jeff Pulver on Twitter, and a crazy thing happened, which really it was what happened with the Dalai Lama that really got reality road, because one of my friends is Ann Curry. She kind of has a job at NBC News, although I don't know what she does anymore. But on the third day, the earthquake was on the ground. And what happened in Haiti that day was the U.S. Air Force took control of the runways in Port-au-Prince. And Doctors Without Borders is an organization which had 3 planes of cargoes and supplies trying to go to Haiti to help out. And guess what happened? They were not allowed to land. So Doctors Without Borders starts putting out press releases, goes on Twitter, and says, please let us land our planes. Ann Curry puts out a tweet at U.S. Air Force, because they're on Twitter. You know, anyone can talk to the U.S. Air Force. Please let Doctors Without Borders land their plane. Well, for those of you on Twitter, I simply retweeted Ann Curry. I wrote at U.S. Air Force, please let Doctors Without Borders land their plane. To my utter amazement, a minute later, I got a tweet at U.S. Air Force, at Jeff Pulver, we're on it. Really? Okay. An hour later, I got a tweet at U.S. Air Force, at Jeff Pulver, the plane has landed. So I wrote, thanks for telling me. And then I checked it out, and I got this message that, you know, it's kind of creepy when some people follow you on Twitter, at U.S. Air Force is following you. And I went on their Twitter account. I was number 27. I understood the White House, Southern Command, U.S. Army, but me. So what do you do when someone follows you? You can send them a direct message. So I send them a direct message, where are you? The Pentagon. Now, to this day, I have not called in my chit of, please, I need an airlift, I need help, but I am connected to the Air Force. And I have the same connectedness, by the way, Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, they sent 270 people to Haiti to help out. They set up the first mobile hospital. And a friend of mine, in one of the startups I invested in, 10 days after the earthquake, he actually did a search and rescue and saved someone's life based on a journalist reporting a scream. And it's the Dalai Lama, basically, right after this all happened, somebody asked him about the future of humanity and what he thought in the 21st century. And he said that he'd never, in his entire life, he had never seen more outpouring of love than what happened in Haiti. And that his outlook for the future of humanity was increased positively because of the connectedness that we all have. And so somewhere in all these wires and stuff, I do believe there's a human spirit that's alive and well and kicking. And there's a connectedness that's just going to grow that's very hard to deny. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening tonight.
I'd like to thank the University of Miami School of Business Administration and Dean Anderson for hosting this wonderful event. I'd like to thank the Alkali Brothers Association. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you, Joseph, for helping out before. That was really amazing. If I forget anyone else individually, I'm sorry. I want to just thank everyone for coming. I hope everyone was inspired, because I know I was.